Welcome everyone. Before I start, I want to give recognition to those people who are learning sponsors. People donate money to sponsor learning here at Torah Or in Boca Raton, and we want to acknowledge them. We have people sponsored a year of learning for Rabbi Dr. Chaim Shapiro, Rav Chaim and Shlomo Aaron, Learning Friends in memory of Saul Chapman, Yisrael Kalman Ben Moshe, Friends of Judy Garber in her memory, Yehudis Bat Shalom, Friends of Alvin Greenfield, his memory, Avram Ben Yaakov, Friends of Dr. Sonny Meiselman in his memory, Nisan Yitzchak Ben Shlomo Zalman, Charlotte Chandler Stone in memory of her brother Stephen Chandler, Shalom Ben Moshe David, Dov Bodlander in memory of his wife Adele Bodlander, Adel Bat Yehuda Tzvi. We have a month of learning sponsored by the Friends of Chana Lanis in memory of Chana's father, Ilya Eliyahu Ben Avram Zusha, by Phyllis and Chaim Reese in memory of her mother, Malka Bat Zev, by the Sklar family in memory of their father, Moshe Mordechai Ben Meir. We have a week sponsored by Michael and Sharon Glass in memory of his father, Yitzchak Tzvi Ben Yochel Michal. May the Neshamos all have an Aliyah.
Amen.
So what are we doing here? So you just had an interesting presentation by Rabbi Green about prayer, tefillah, and what we're doing. First of all, I'm Dave Cheslow. I know most of you. Some of you are I see you in shul, but we don't necessarily know our names. We've been here a few years, and the last couple of years, what I've done is more or less like a survey course of Gemara, picking out particular topics and spending a few sessions in each one. And what I decided to do this year is to do what they call a Daf HaShavua. I don't know if you all heard about Rabbi Teitz. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Rabbi Pinchas Teitz was famous for, he was, I guess, the first one to broadcast around the world on the radio. He used to come on every Saturday night, and Jews around the world will listen to him, and they learn Daf Gemara in Yiddish. He had a beautiful Yiddish, and it was called Daf HaShavua. So we're going to use that concept, not to say that I'm in any way close to the ability of Rabbi Teitz, but it's the idea that we're going to do something continuous. We're going to start at a certain point, and we're going to see how far we get over the course of the season. So the study of Gemara itself, Rabbi Steinsaltz says that sustaining communities is based on their study of the Talmud. In other words, what we're doing here tonight, we're all studying Talmud together. We are sustaining this community. A Jewish community, Orthodox community, could not exist if the study of Gemara did not happen in that community. So right now, this is probably the only organized class in the village. So we have to pay attention because we are doing our part to keep our community going. In Judaism, we don't have blind faith, right? We question everything, and we're supposed to question everything. And what we're doing here is a search for the truth. So if you have a question about something that I say, or you disagree with an opinion that I give, it's your job to bring it up. Because again, we're looking for the truth here. We're not trying to show off or present some material. We're actually looking for the truth. And we study the Gemara for various reasons. For me, it happens to be a lot of fun. I've been doing it since I'm a little kid, and I love doing it. But it is a holy enterprise, and it's the basis of our religion. You know, when the Torah was given at Sinai, so there were two versions, right? There was the written one, which we see, the physical Torah that we see all the time, the Ten Commandments and so on, and there was the oral law, which was given at the same time. And without the oral law, we could not understand the written law. It would be impossible for us to practice our religion if we did not have the so-called oral law, which has been written down. There are thousands and thousands of written books right now, but it was presented as oral law. It was handed down traditionally from student to teacher to student, all the way down to our present day. This class is for women and men, not just for men. Somehow or other, there is an idea that women shouldn't be studying this, or women don't want to, for whatever reason. And I'm glad to see that there are ladies here, because our daughters grew up in a school which encouraged girls to be learning Gemara, and for its own sake, to have the knowledge. After all, why should women not have the same kind of knowledge as men have? And also, the ladies have a lot more contact day to day with the kids than do the fathers. That's just sort of the way that it is. And so the fact that they know it is certainly a valuable effort. So what is the Gemara anyway? The Gemara is a book, or a series of books, of law, philosophy, prayer, history, Torah. They all have a historical context, and it started again from Moshe Rabbeinu. It was given to him at Sinai. He passed it to Yeshua. From Yeshua it went to the elders, and it got passed down through the generations. And what we know today is we call the oral law, the Talmud. That is the result of thousands of years of study, actually. And the Talmud is, again, it's the foundation of Jewish life. It's a book that's been censored, it's been burned, it's been banned, and yet it continues to be studied by Jews around the world. In fact, there's an event will be taking place on the first of the year, where the Daf Yomi, which we have here in Century Village, we have a couple of Daf Yomi groups, and the cycle is about 7.5 years, and we're completing a cycle right now. I think we're finishing the 13th cycle of Daf Yomi, and there'll be a worldwide celebration of it. So that's how Jews celebrate New Year. It happened to be, it's going to be on New Year's Day, and we celebrate our New Year a little differently than the rest of the world does. And the study of the Talmud has been described as logic plus X. It's logical, it's understandable, but there's something more to it. The history, the study of the Talmud began approximately 30 BCE, before the Common Era, to about 500 in the Common Era. It started with the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was written mostly in Eretz Israel, in Israel. That's why the Mishnah is written in Hebrew, and it was written in Israel. And then the Gemara itself mostly was studied in Babylonian, Babel, under the rule of the Persians, and it's written in Aramaic. So it's interesting that we have two different languages, same study, and the Gemara itself is a commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah was for a period of about 200 years, and then the Gemara another 300 years or so. During this period, there was a lot going on in the world. During this time, after the destruction of the Second Temple, Christianity was growing around the world, and still in all, the Gemara flourished during that period of time. And it worked well in Babylonia, because the Persian rulers were more or less let the Jews run their own operations. We had Jewish government, and the Talmud was able to flourish. After the destruction of the temple, and there was no monarchy, so the courts began to take over. So you had the Sanhedrin, which was more or less ruling, and the Mishnah was eventually compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He codified the Mishnah, what we see today, which is written down, and then the Gemara, which followed afterwards, was something that was more or less a commentary on it. And interestingly, the rabbis, the personalities that we're going to encounter in our study, spent their time not only in study, as there are a lot of people today who are learning in Kollel and so on, but they were shoemakers, they were weavers, they were blacksmiths, they were builders, they were architects, they were teamsters, they were sailors, they were peddlers, they were shoftim, they were bankers, money changers, they were merchants. So they had all sorts of different occupations, in addition to the fact that they studied the Talmud together. The education system in the time of the Gemara was decentralized, and it was uneven. In some places there was a very good system. Some places the kids did not learn very much at all, and that's part of the reason why this began to be written down. Originally, it was not intended to be written down. It was passed down orally from teacher to student, father to son, but eventually it had to be written down because otherwise the fear was that it would get lost. So it was put into writing, and Rabbi Teitz, who I quoted before, who I referred to before, called it like a telegram. You know, the Torah itself could have a small one sentence. In fact, on our study on Shabbos afternoon, I pointed out that with one small sentence had 3 mitzvahs in it. When it talks about that we're supposed to slaughter the korban pesach and eat it on matzah and maror, so it's about 7 or 8 words, and there are 3 mitzvahs. So Rabbi Teitz said that's a telegram. And if you remember what telegrams were, people who are watching online might not know what a telegram is, but you'd have a couple of words, then it would say stop, and you'd have another couple of words, so you had to understand it to sort of read between the lines. And that's kind of what the Torah is. No words are superfluous. Everything in it is there intentionally. And then came the Mishnah, the Gemara, all the commentaries, which continue to grow to this day. So what we're doing today, this is alive. This is not a dead subject. We're not learning something that was studied by the ancient Hebrews. This is a living study, and we're part of it. We're part of that living continuity of the Torah. Today, there's no temple, there's no Sanhedrin, but what we're doing here in shuls and batei medrash all around the world is we're continuing that study. So the Torah was given, we said, at Sinai, the oral law and the written law. Later on came the group called the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. They were around the period of the Persian rule between 539 and 332 before the Common Era. Then part of that group was Ezra and a lot of anonymous scholars and leaders who we don't know the names, but they were considered part of this. They call it in English, they translate it the Men of the Great Assembly, and they codified a lot of the rules. So Rabbi Green is teaching about tefillah, about prayer. They actually put together what we call the Shemona Esrei, which we know is 18 or 19 lessons actually, but they actually put it together in the form that we say today. This was organized back in sometime around 300 or so before the Common Era, and then they connected the oral law to the written law. After 332, they had the group was called the Zugot. You had pairs. You had most famous ones, Hillel and Shammai, and they continued the tradition. And then at that time, what was going on in the world? You had a lot of Hellenism was happening at that time. The Orthodox, or the Jews in general, were being persecuted. You had the controversies between what they called the Stukim and the Prushim, those who respected the authority of the rabbis, the interpretation of the Torah, and the ones who said that what they believed in was a strict literal translation, but what they really meant was to undermine the authority of the rabbis and the religious courts. And eventually we know that the Perushim, those who believe in the tradition that we do, won out, and that's what we have today. You had the Chasmonaean, the Maccabean revolt, and then you had after the period of the Zugot, you have what's called the Tanaim, and the Tanaim are the ones who were studying what we call as the Mishnah. You had Hillel and Shammai were the first two, and then Rabbi Akiva, who was one of my personal heroes, actually sort of compiled it, categorized it. His most outstanding student was Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir is, when a Mishnah is quoted with no author, most often it's Rabbi Meir, and then Rabbi Yehuda Nasi put it into writing. And so the Mishnah, as we know it today, was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. After his death, then began the period of the Amoraim, who basically were commenting on the Mishnah and expanding upon it. And then during that time, you had what they call the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. There were two versions. There were Jews living. The two centers were in Yerushalayim and in a couple of cities in Bavel. And after then came all the commentaries. You had the Gaonim. They were centered in the Muslim Empire. And when that empire disintegrated, basically, and Baghdad became less important. So then other places, other cities came alive. Okay, I'm still working, I'm still recording? Very good, okay. So, and after that period, then became the European commentaries. The most important one, without whom we really could not learn very much at all, is Rashi. He was in the 11th century in Germany and France. His sons-in-law and his grandsons followed him. They compiled what's called the Tosafot, which is more or less a commentary on his work. The Gemara was never printed until 1520 in our common years. Pope Leo X issued a license. You couldn't just print the Torah. He basically controlled. Printing had been invented, but he gave permission to print it. And the first printer of the Gemara was a man named Daniel Bromberg, a Christian actually, and his family. They printed the first Gemaras. So when we look at the way that the Gemara is organized, and I'm going to show you that in a little bit, it was actually done by this Christian printer. And we maintain that same system today, but it was started by him, and that's the way it was organized. In 1553, Pope Julius decided it was time to burn the Talmud, because I guess somehow or other it was becoming popular, and they had burnings of the Talmud. And eventually we prevailed, and there were controversies because the Pope issued two competing licenses, one in Vilna, one in a place called Slavuta, and what happened was the Vilna Shas. Shas means Shisha Sidri Mishnah. It's the entire all the volumes of the Gemara. It was so popular, it sold out. He was given a license for a number of copies. It sold out, and then the other group began printing it, and there was competition. And in the end, what we call today the Vilna Shas won out. Today there are a lot of sources, a lot of resources that make it accessible. So the title of my course, I call it Talmud Without Fear, and I call it that because a lot of people are hesitant to approach it because it looks maybe kind of scary. And so today we have very popular translations. What you have in front of you is the Sansino, which was done, I guess, in the 40s, right? Mm-hmm. That's when it first was done. The first time that the Gemara was actually translated, all of it into English. Mm-hmm. And today we have Art Scroll, we have the Koran does it in English. Pardon? Schottenstein, right, the Art Scroll. And then we have, and now what I like to use is Steinsaltz, where he translates it into modern Hebrew. So that's fun for me because it's a challenge to try to learn not only the Aramaic but also the modern Hebrew. So what you have in front of you is the Gemara, the way that it is, what they call the Vilna Shas, and this is typical. This actually is the beginning of the Masechta Megillah, which we did a couple years ago, and on the page you can see that you have the central part of it. The first part is this first Mishnah, then the Gemara starts, and then you have commentaries around it. You have Rashi is over on this side, Tosfos over here, and then some of the other ones you have Rashi. So Rashi, again, we said he was around the 12th century, 1040 to 1105. The Tosfos, which are his son-in-law and his grandchildren, so they took over for him after he passed away. So they were like 12th and 13th century. And then we have on the page over here, Rabbeinu Hananel. He was the first one. He was the first one to actually do another commentary. And he was active in North Africa around the 11th century. He's on the outside margin. Then we have Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah, that's up on the top over here. This person was Rabbi Yehoshua Boaz in Italy around the 16th century. Then there's one called Torah Or, which is not on this page, but I wanted to mention it because we are here in our congregation, Torah Or. Then you have Masoras Hashas, that's up here, and that's giving us gives references. So sometimes when another Gemara is referenced, so Masoras Hashas is going to tell you where you can find it. And then we have this one, it's called the Bach, where the Bach is giving, he gives sometimes because of the fact that this was handed down, it was censored, it was burned, so on, sometimes there's a difference of opinion as to what the actual language is that he gives you corrections to the text. And you know, in the Gemara that we're going to be studying in Baba Basra, Rabbeinu Gershom is also one of the major commentaries, and he was like the 10th century, 11th century, and of course he's famous for making the decree that we can't have more than one wife, right? He made that decree, and actually they say that it expired, but somehow or other we haven't gone back to that. So what I want to do is I want to get started a little bit. And last year the tractate that we're going to be working on is called Baba Basra, and it actually originally was 1/3 of one large volume, was Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra. It was like, they called it the three gates, and they separated the 3 volumes. I guess maybe it was too unwieldy. And this one concentrates on more or less practical halacha, practical Jewish law. And I've been told by some ladies that women want to know the bottom line. And so they don't want so much theoretical, they want to know what's practical. And Baba Basra it deals with business issues, it deals with property, it deals with inheritance, it deals with loans and courts and so many other topics. So the first chapter in it, we started a little bit last year, so I'm just going to briefly give you a little bit of a summary of what it is that we learned last year, and then we'll see if we can get started a little bit on continuing today. So the beginning part of it talks about when you have a situation where 2 people share a common courtyard. You know, the way that you can see it today. There's some sections in Israel. If you go in Yerushalayim, in Katamon, for example, some of the houses are arranged around a central courtyard, and everybody has the right to use the courtyard, right? So it deals with cases. Well, suppose I don't know, Arthur and Jerry have their houses facing a common courtyard, and one day Arthur gets tired of sharing that with Jerry, so he says, "I'm going to build a wall down the middle to separate our properties." So what are the rules regarding that? And does Jerry have to participate if he doesn't want to? So the Gemara deals with all that. And so what we're going to start with today, we're on it's Daf Daled Amud Beis, which is 4b, and I marked it for you. The little pink flag that I gave you is the Hebrew, and then the blue or green one is the English. And it's going to deal with a particular case, which I found pretty interesting, where you have 3 farmers. Okay, you have, this one is Eitan Tzvi Elitzur. I don't know where Mendel got that name. That's the name of our oldest grandson. So Eitan Tzvi Elitzur is a farmer. He's got his farm on 3 sides, encloses or surrounds the farm belonging to Abraham. It's another one of our grandsons. And then my name, David Yitzchak, is over on the far side. And so what's happening over here? You have these farmers, and Eitan decides he wants to build a fence separating his property from Avram's property. And he's surrounding him on 3 sides. So if he builds this fence on all 3 sides, did Avram gain anything?
I think
no.
Yes.
What?
I think yes.
You think he does?
Yeah,
Does
he's a
Avram
farmer.
gain? What?
He doesn't gain land, but he gains the ability to have his domain enclosed.
Right.
If he has farm animals, they're not going to be running wild. He has an allocated spot.
The only problem is, though, there's no fence over here on this side.
So he has no exit.
So nothing. He has an easement.
He does have easement.
So I'm not showing you that because he has to have a way to get out of his property.
Mm-hmm.
But his problem is that his animals can still go out there's no fence over here, right? So he's enclosed on 3 sides, and Eitan comes to him and says, hey, I built this fence, you should pay me, we should split the cost of building that fence, right? Because after all.
Why should they, what good did he do in Avram?
That's the point. So what the Mishnah is going to say, and we're going to get to in a second, is going to say he doesn't gain.
So then he shouldn't pay.
He doesn't have to pay. But now suppose Avram now decides that he's going to build this 4th wall.
Oh,
So he builds that 4th wall. What did he do?
he's enclosed his property.
He closed his property. He shows, because what happens? Eitan builds the fence on 3 sides. And he goes to Abraham and he says to Abraham, you know, I built the fence, it cost a lot of money. You should at least pay half because you're benefiting from it. So Abraham says, I don't need that fence. I'm not going to pay you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then Abraham goes down, he builds a 4th wall.
Now we created value.
Now he created value. So now Eitan goes back to him and says, hey, obviously you appreciate what I did for you because you enclosed the 4th wall, right? Okay, so let's look at the text. Okay, so the Mishnah says, Hamakif es chaveru misholosh ruchosov. So if somebody surrounds his neighbor on 3 sides, right? That's the situation we have. V'godar asarishona, v'esashnia, v'esashlishis. And he builds a fence on side 1, side 2, and side 3. Ein mechayven also. You cannot force the inner one to pay, right? Because he didn't really gain, because his property is still exposed, still open, right? Rabbi Yossi Omer, im amad v'godar asarviyas. So Rabbi Yossi comes along and says, well, if he got up and he fenced in the 4th side, in that case, Magal gonna love es hakol. Then we can go back and say, hey, listen, you demonstrate by your actions that you want that fence. Now you're gonna pay. So now the Mishnah is going to get into what does that mean that he has to pay, how much does he have to pay, and so on. But the point is that by his actions, he's demonstrated that this fence is important to him, important enough to put his own money out. So he's got to come back now and reimburse his neighbor, right? Okay. So that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Halacha Rabbi Yossi. He says that Rabbi Yossi is correct, and that is the halacha, that's the din, that's the law. Damar, because he says, Im Amad v'gadar esaravias. If he got up and he fenced in the 4th side, Magalgan alav esakol. We roll. Magalgan means we roll it. In other words, we not only do we ask him to pay for the 4th side, but we roll the other 3 sides as well. He's going to have to pay for the whole thing. So loshna amad nikaf, loshna amad makif. Doesn't matter whether it's the person who is on the outside is doing the fencing, and the one on the inside of the fencing. Either way, he now has to come up with his share or a share of what Eitan did to start with. So Itmar, the Gemara says, Rav Huna Amar hakol lefi masha gadar. So what he says is that, what are we going to ask him to pay? How much are we going to ask him to pay for this fence? Because suppose he puts up, a stone wall. Let's say Eitan puts up a stone wall around the property. So for Avram, he doesn't need a stone wall. He could use something less expensive, right? So just because Avram put up the stone wall, we're going to require Eitan rather put up the stone wall. Are we going to require Avram to pay him for the stone wall? So Rav Huna says, according to what was constructed. So Chiyav Arav Amar, so Chiyav Arav disagrees. He says, Hakol lefi demei hakanim b'zol. He said no. He could have put up a fence made out of reeds, cheap wooden fence, because all he was concerned about really is that when his wheat is high, he doesn't want the animals coming in there. He doesn't need a wall all the way around. Not like, if you go drive along in New England, you see all these stone walls in Connecticut, people separating their properties that way. But He doesn't need that. What he needs is that he wants the protection that when his wheat is ready to be harvested, he doesn't want animals coming in there. And a simple fence made out of reeds, like a snow fence, we might say, is good enough for him. So you can't expect him to compensate, right?
Right.
So just because Eitan wanted to have that stone wall doesn't mean that Avram has to pay that. He's got to pay something because he's getting a benefit and he shows that he wants it, but we can't require him to compensate, right? Tanan. So continuing, Hamakiv es chaver misholosh ruchosav. So somebody is surrounding his neighbor on three sides, three directions. V'gadar sarishona v'sashnia v'sashlishis, and he fenced in the first one, and he fenced in the second one, he fenced in the third one. Ein mechayev, so we can't require that internal one to pay. Horavius mechayev, so but if the fourth one is enclosed, so now we can come back to them and say, hey, look, you are totally enclosed, so you've got a benefit, and you have to pay. So the Gemara says, Ema Seifos. Well, take a look at the ending, the last statement of our Mishnah, and the last statement is, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Im Amad Gadar Servius Magag and Levas Akol. So if he, in other words, just even in the case where the outer one, let's say he surrounded, let's say Eitan surrounded Avram on four sides, not just on three sides, and he built the fence all the way around. So that benefits Avraham too, because animals can come through there. But Rabbi Yossi says Avram has to participate. In other words, if he does not participate, you can't prove that he wanted. Even though he benefited, you can't require him to pay because he can say, I don't need it. But if he did participate, in that case, we expect him to come across and participate in the whole thing. So the Gemara says, Bishlam al Rav Huna. So I can understand what Rav Huna says to Amar. He says, Hakol lefi masha godarba. He says the whole thing depends upon the material that was used. So if a more expensive material was used and he appreciates that, he accepts that, in that case, he's going to have to pay that thing, that same value. Hainu de'ika bein Tana Kama Rav Yossi. So what is the difference between the first Tana in our Mishnah, who is anonymous, there's no author stated, which means it probably is Rabbi Meir, but he says, so what is the difference with what his statement is and Rabbi Yossi? Because Rabbi Yossi comes in at the end and says that if the internal one builds his fence, then he's got to pay for everything. So Tana Kama Savar, so the first Tana of our Mishnah says, Hakol lefi demei kanim bezolin. He says the only thing we can require him to pay, if we are requiring him to participate, is the price of an inexpensive reed fence. Right? We can't require him. So just because his neighbor wanted to make this stone fence, so we can't require him to pay it. Umasha gadar lo, but not necessarily what it was that he used. Rabbi Yossi Savar Hakol lefi shemasha gadar. So Rabbi Yossi says no. If the outer one invested a large amount of money in that stone wall, so according to Rabbi Yossi, we can require the inner one to compensate him for half of that value. So Ela Lechia Bar Rav Domar, but according to Lechia Bar Rav, Hakol lefi demei kanim bezol. So he says also, his opinion is that you can only require him to pay. Am I making sense? All this okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, I show I want a fence. I do want the fence, but I don't need such an expensive fence, right? So you can't require me, right? And
pay for the expensive fence.
Right. It's common sense, right? It's common sense, and that's this Gemara that we're learning about Basra is a lot of it. It's common sense. It's custom. It's tradition. You're going to see very few psukim actually quoted here. A lot of the Gemaras that we're learning, there's a lot of scriptural references. Not too much here because the rabbis ruled on custom, on tradition, on common sense. So here, you can't. He's saying, okay, I'll go along with you, but you can't require me to pay that whole amount. So
How do they come to a reckoning? How do they come to a final reckoning? I'm going to pay you, but how much should I pay you?
So the point is, so the final decision is that he can only be required to pay for the less expensive one.
Oh.
You can't force him So, unless he built a fourth wall out of stone too.
That's what I was just gonna say, what did he use to build the fourth?
Right, so if he used
So he
it,
should be, whatever he used for that should be somehow,
right, because he's showing that he wants that.
yeah.
And
Then
he
you
can't,
should pay for the
he
other.
can't come back and say, hey, you know, I don't need that expensive fence, because he put up the same thing
Yeah.
himself, right? So again, it's common sense, right, which is not so common, right? So,
What about David Yitzchak?
what about, oh, that's me, David Yitzchak. So David Yitzchak is on the fourth side. So I've gotta give permission to build this fence over here, and so now, it depends on what's going on with me, with my fourth side. So, is there a fence over here and over here? So then the same questions, the same issues can come up.
Excuse me,
Yes, sir.
did Abraham have to ask Tzvi, did Tzvi have to ask Abraham's permission to build a fence?
If he builds it on his own property, he doesn't have to.
Okay, because you
So-
just said you would have to ask now.
So here's the situation. He's building a fence on these three sides. So, by the way, in the description of the course in the booklet, I said we're going to talk about American law too. So, if you in your house that you owned up north, did you have a fence around the property?
No.
You didn't have a fence. Okay, we did. So, but the law is that you have to build it on your property, right?
The fence must be on
On
your
your
domain.
property.
On your property, it's gotta be on your property. So if I build it on my property, I'm separating from my neighbor, but it's at my expense. I'm building on my property. So in this case, what Eitan did is he built the fence, he came in from the border, property line, and he built the fence on three sides, okay? And then he came to Avraham, and he said to him, Avraham, I built this fence, which benefits you too. You should participate, you should pay me.
Did he have to ask Avram for permission?
No, because he built it on his own property.
Oh.
No.
Would have
If
been
it-
so
if-
much easier
if-
to ask at the beginning instead of, hello.
Thank
da,
you.
da, da.
Right. If he'd asked in the beginning, they could have agreed right away what material they're gonna
Yeah,
use.
that's right.
Right, exactly right. But he didn't. What can I tell you? He went ahead, he built the fence without
You know,
asking.
these guys, they never,
Right. Yes, Dave.
Okay, don't hate me.
I love you. You kidding?
No, you won't in a minute.
Remember, we're
When
here for the truth
Eitan
here.
built the fence,
Eitan built the fence.
he built it for his benefit,
He did.
strictly for his benefit. He enclosed his whole property.
Correct.
Either he enclosed his whole property or he enclosed just that part to keep Abram away from him.
Right.
It was strictly for his benefit.
Right.
When it's strictly for his benefit, whatever Abram does on the other side has nothing to do with it. He
Right.
shouldn't be responsible to pay at all.
Right, and that's what Avram said to him. Avram
And-
said, I don't need this fence.
So to me, this whole thing reads like, well, a compromise to maintain shalom bias.
Well, that's part of it, not when it comes to money. You know?
That's what this is.
We're dealing with money here, so what's happened? He builds the fence on three sides, and he comes to Abraham, and like Rachel said, he didn't ask permission first, right? If they had discussed it in the beginning, they would have worked it all out, but they didn't. He built it on his property, on three sides, and he says to Abraham, it's good for you to have a fence too, because, you know, my cat might run onto your property and do damage, right? So it's better for you that there's a fence there too. So you should pay me. But Avram says, hey, you don't help me any because it's still open on this fourth wall. So he can say to him, I'm not gonna pay you because I don't have a completely enclosed property. Doesn't benefit me to be enclosed on three sides. However, if Abram now sees that it's nice to have it on three sides, but it'd be very good if he did it on the fourth side, and he put the
He's
wall up on the fourth
complicit.
side, now what did he do?
Well, one more question.
Sure.
There are three types of fences, at least three types. Keep people out,
Right.
keep people in,
Right.
and a boundary.
Okay.
Does that affect it?
So a boundary, I'm assuming is very low, right? Like you see like a
Just need a
couple of
marker.
stones on the, just a marker, right? So that's not this type of fence, because although that's a benefit too. Because if he decides he wants to sell his property, it's already been surveyed. right? So, you know, when you sold your house, somebody had to pay for a survey, right?
No, there was an existing survey. but-
Okay, but at some point the survey had to be done, and so somebody had to pay for it. So when he put this fence up, he made a survey. So that benefits him too, even if it was just a low marker. But certainly he doesn't want animals or random people going onto his property, especially when his weed is high. He wants to preserve that, right? So by building that fourth wall, by building that fourth section of the fence, he demonstrated that he does want it. He's hoping to get the 3 parts,
Free.
you know,
For free.
free, right? Because after all, Eitan didn't talk to him first, right? So he says, hey, you know, if you had talked to me first, we could have worked it out. But since you didn't do that, that's
So
kind of
David,
your problem.
Who enforces this, the payment? Who enforces?
So the courts are gonna enforce it, right?
You know, it goes to court, it goes to Sanhedrin, I mean.
Yeah,
to,
because he's
Nation,
he's going to take his neighbor to court, and then the courts are going to enforce it.
Basically.
And we will continue this discussion, God willing, next week.
Very
Yeah,
excellent.
very good.
Very good.
David, do you wanna hold these, or you want us to bring them back?
You're welcome to take them if you want to, or whatever.
Just bring them back.
My house is not ready.
I'll give you the responsibility to bring them back.
But more commercial.